Welcome back everyone to episode 4 of our tutorial series on Advanced Tactics Gold. In the previous, first I want to make an aside that I will have to run my fans. There will be a bit of a background noise, I apologize about that. And also there are some people making noise outside, but I'm going to record this anyway just because the noise can be immersion breaking, but this is just a tutorial and I don't think it'll be too distracting. So speaking of noise, you might be able to hear that, but as long as I can be understood, I think this is fine for a tutorial. Hopefully not too annoying. But in order to get these up quicker, I think I should just record. Okay, so that being said, on the last video we covered production. We see that we got ourselves building engineers and staff, which is good because we already kind of looked at the fact that staff is down to 25%, and this is not good. One thing I'm going to cover in this video immediately, although the main point of this video is going to be troop transfers. So moving our troops from the headquarters, who are currently receiving the reinforcements. As we can see, the Supreme Command is receiving a lot, and we set up the first army to receive some defender units and the second army to receive some tanks. So aside from that, we already have so many troops stockpiled up with Halder in our Supreme. Let's try to get these units to the front. And there's multiple ways of doing this. The simplest way of doing it, and I'll just demonstrate this with at least one unit, is to manually move them ourselves. We don't want to move our whole Supreme Command because it's immobilized due to all the supply here, and we don't want to leave that supply. So we'll probably leave this HQ here. What we do want to do is we will be using our rail capacity to move units to the front, but tanks just happen to be a very heavy unit. They're very difficult to transport, so if I wanted to transfer T to another headquarters, we can see that the rail capacity this is 10 hexes away, and it's 10 times per weight per hex in this case. So we have staff will only cost weight of 1, and we can see that that translates into a rail capacity of 100. But artillery is much more expensive to move at 1,000, and tanks are even more expensive because they have a weight of 25. So sometimes it's better not to move your tanks to the front, especially because they're very mobile vehicles by themselves. In fact, they can help us move some infantry to the front because tanks have a small carrying capacity themselves. Aboard each tank unit, each subformation, which I don't know what the scaling would be, you can carry 5 infantry infantry formations on top. So we can have 1 tank and 5 of any kind of infantry right on top, and they will still move at the rate of a tank. So what we're going to do is create some new units, and this is something you'll be very familiar with. Creating new units is going to use political points. Remember, that's what I talked about officer pool, and the main thing political points will be used for, of course, is your research. We'll get to that in a later episode, but actually, do we make enough? Before I forget, are we making enough political points? Probably not. Honestly, we probably need more political points than what we're producing, but okay. Well, I'll leave it. I'll check that out. Maybe we'll make the Russians like the research oriented, although that's not historical, it's just a tutorial anyway. Okay, but I was talking about the tanks carrying 5 each. So what we're going to do is create a new unit. We're going to select a formation. The HQs you see here are HQs, obviously, so we have to create them separate. They're their own breed. So you can't send reinforcements directly to a division. They have to go to a headquarters. It's almost never useful to make an HQ by itself, however. You all want all these headquarters to have a leader with it, because these are the ones who give you this huge bonus to any subordinate units. So if you had a Supreme Command that didn't control any frontline units, it would be conceivable to remove your leader from that position and move him to a frontline spot, because there's no logistics bonus for having a good leader as part of a headquarters. However, just in general, you're always going to make an HQ plus a leader. You can also make a leader by clicking on the officer pool. You can recruit a new one for 5. So you can see that it's 5 to make an HQ, it's 5 to recruit an officer. So what's the difference between doing them separate and together? Well, it takes 1 point to, I think it's 1 point to a point. Maybe it's more, but I'm pretty sure it's 1 point to appoint a recruited officer to an HQ. So you're just going to cost yourself 1 political point needlessly. So what you will be doing is just doing that new and HQ plus leader. Probably not going to use HQ very often, but more than likely 90% of the time you'll be making formations, which is what we'll do here. And I actually messed this up. We got this one in the wrong hex. You make the unit wherever you have your cursor selected. But this is kind of a perfect time for me to go over strategic movement of blank units. If you want to use strategic movement, you can. So let's just say that this infantry is here. We could select strategic transfer, which is going to use the capacity we have, land for trucks, navy for, merchant ships, and rail for the trains. It's going to use that kind of capacity beyond the action points of this unit. So this is one way to get your units very quickly to the front if they're already formed as a division. Just note that they will have the same penalty. They will all take a very big hit to readiness, the same way our units which are being transferred in and out of headquarters are being hit with that readiness penalty. And I'll show that in a second. However, there's no readiness penalty for a unit that doesn't have any subformations in it. So we're going to choose strategic transfer. It already selected for me which headquarters I want to use the strategic transfer with. The reason for that is the first and the second army don't even have any land capacity available, so it knows it can only choose the supreme headquarters. So of course we're going to be using it with that. Otherwise there would be a prompt asking you which headquarters to use. So we will be using that, and now I just want to click where I want to strategic transfer this unit to. So it's from here, and I actually just want to move it 1 hex, and you can see it's going to cost 0. Blank formations are just kind of like division ideas. That's how I kind of think about it. It's the paperwork and all that goes into maintaining a division that you have set up with the higher ups. But once that's created, the paperwork in somebody's filing cabinet, it doesn't cost anything, I guess, to just tell them, well, that unit's actually over here instead. Now, after we have a blank unit, which we should have just made directly with this headquarters, but we didn't, that's fine, we got to cover strategic transfer. Now that they're in the same hex, we can transfer units for free. Well, for free, except for one small caveat. The units being transferred stand to lose some readiness. So first of all, this unit which I've created, I forgot to assign a headquarters to it. In fact, let me go ahead and do what I should have done correctly the first time. And you can be following along completely, making these mistakes along with me, because it'll help familiarize you with the interface. But I'm going to create another new unit and make it a formation. And this is what I skipped last time, is select HQ for unit. Just in case we are playing zoomed out here, if we were playing zoomed in, these would be spread apart, which I can show in a second. But in case, you can click through and the units will cycle. But as I was already kind of moving my mouse cursor towards, this upper right window allows you to quickly select any unit inside of a hex, even if there's a massive stack. Because even when the units are spread apart on the most zoomed in level, beyond 5 you still have just a stack. It can't show more than 5 like side by side. So 6 and more, you'll have to just refer to this and click on the unit you want. So I'm going to click on my HQ, the Supreme Command, and I'm going to hit this check mark, which is going to make that red unit, blank division card, part of this headquarters. You can see we didn't do that with this. It's not a big deal though, because we can always just set the HQ for this unit directly with the H key or by selecting this, and then we do the same thing. Good, so now both of these units have the red bar indicating that they belong to the Supreme Command. Now we're going to click on our Supreme Command, and we're going to transfer some forces into these blank units. Going back to what I was saying a little bit ago, we wanted to move tanks. And tanks, they're really expensive to move by rail. Most often, the best way to move them is just to drive them to the front themselves because they're mobile vehicles and they can move pretty far on their own. We're going to take 4 light tanks, which is like not a bad idea for, it's a pretty reasonable division, is 4 tanks per. Because these guys have carrying capacity, as we have seen, I'm going to take 20 riflemen with me as well, which is just going to reduce the land capacity I have to use, or I should say the rail capacity I have to use to transfer infantry to the front. Because this is a bit far away for infantry, probably 3 turns, whereas the armor can get to the front almost in a single turn. Now, we've made this headquarters the red one, but we can move this one pretty far up, almost by our red buddies here. Let's just move this one over here. However, there's another mechanic that I haven't really talked about, or I may have alluded to, I don't remember. We talked about staff percentage, and we already saw how we need to make more staff. That's why we're making 40 more staff for the Supreme Command. But another mechanic involved is the HQ proximity. So although this red unit is very close to this green unit, it has the red headquarters attached to it, which means it's subordinate to the Supreme Command, not to my second army. Because it's reporting back all this way, its HQ proximity is 0. You can see in this informational bar here that although our Supreme Command has a 20 and 20 bonus it wants to give units, that actually up here you'll see that 0 combat mat and 0 morale mod is actually occurring. And that's for 2 reasons. One, we have low staff percentage, but also we're out of the HQ proximity. How these things work is if you're within 3 hexes of your HQ, you're considered in perfect proximity. Every hex beyond that reduces the proximity by 20%. So 1, 2, 3, we're okay. This should be 80%. This should be 60%, which means when I click here, we expect the HQ proximity to be 40%. You can see that although 40%, it should only reduce the statistics of my HQ proximity by a little bit less than half, so about 10 and 10. The combat mod usually just drops by that much, so we can see 8, but the morale mod is much more dependent on the staff percentage, so we can see that that has dropped to 3%. The tank we moved out is now at 0%, and you can see that it's now at 0 and 0. So we want to transfer units to frontline headquarters and not leave them in our Supreme Command. So as we move our units forward, in fact, normally what you're going to do is, although I set this as my red, let's now select it as green. And I'm going to just transfer another set of tanks directly in. So transfer, click. Let's get the other set of tanks, 4 light tanks. And let's also do the same thing, 20 more rifles. There's our new division. And what has happened is the readiness of this one dropped by 25 down to 75, but this one's going to drop by 75 down to 25. Now that's pretty intense because what happens here is just transferring a unit within its own HQ is 25. Now let's take another example. This infantry is pretty far behind the front, so we don't mind changing its readiness. I wouldn't want to switch the headquarters of either of these because if they lose readiness, they stand to be counterattacked, and that would be bad if they don't have their fighting strength up, which readiness is a abstraction of. This one's far enough away from the front that we can change its HQ to the second army. Now, okay, hand cards are these things. You do lose these if you transfer a unit in, but I'm not going to talk about hand cards much. They're not really my favorite part of the game. I'm not really in love with that mechanic, but it's fine, and I'll explain it towards the end. However, basically just moving a new unit in resets the hand cards of this unit. This prevents you from, let's say your hand card was something about armor, like Heinz Guderian can play Blitz, which allows you to go to the front. It gives you a boost to an armor unit. If you get this unit, but you have like a major tank unit in somebody else's headquarters, the mechanic is supposed to prevent you from switching that tank unit over to your new headquarters, just to use it for this turn, and then switching it back to another headquarters. So it prevents you from like doctoring in different units for your headquarters in order to take advantage of their abilities with that card. So that's enough all about the cards, but they lost 50% readiness switching. They were at 100%, now they're at 50%, switching over to the green. So we've done it, they've switched, and now their HQ proximity, well, it's still actually 40, but it's going to only get better as we move towards the front and not worse moving away from the red. In fact, the frontline headquarters actually have 25 and 25 for their combat morale, which means that the net effect, if we disregard the readiness for a second, is actually, you can see the combat morale is 20 and the morale mod is 9, whereas before I think it was 8 and 3. So you can see that HQ proximity, the combat mod and combat morale, it might actually be more an like a result of the staffing, and maybe HQ proximity is how much of that mod actually takes place. Yeah, so it's telling us here that staff points in HQ expressed as a % of needed staff points. So if we look up here, this is 108. Here, we can do a very simple test here. So this one is plus 99% and plus 47%. Whee! Well, that's pretty good. But this one has a HQ proximity of 80%. Let's see if it's lower. It is. Okay, so that is true. So both of these combinations, the 80 and the staff percentage, do go into the current combat mod. But you can see plus 99%, plus 47% versus something like this, which is only plus 20 and plus 9. Or, you can see it here, that this one has plus 0, and this one has plus 48, plus 23. I guess that staff percentage is really affecting the modification for the HQ effect. Okay, so it's not so important to get bogged down in those details. That's really much more advanced. You can see I myself don't know those kind of things. My general idea is keep my units within 3, 4, or maybe 5 units from my headquarters. Just keep them local. And as we move away from the Supreme headquarters, we do that by changing those units over to the frontline headquarters. So we'll switch this one over, and now we can see that this readiness has gone down to 38. So unfortunately, what I've done here is a little bit less efficient because my readiness went down to 25. And actually, if you had made the unit as a red HQ and then switched it over to green only later, it would be at a readiness of 38. So just a word to the wise, do those in separate steps if you want to kind of reduce the penalty. Now we'll move these tanks to the front as well. I guess we can move these both. I want to keep them back here. Hopefully that's far enough away that the Russians won't detect them. They may even make a push into this gap, which would be lethal for them on the next turn. Because the readiness on these units is a little bit low coming from the Supreme headquarters, but we know that they won't be used until next turn, and by then they will have regained some of their readiness. Okay, so this is supposed to be about transfers. Let's actually do a transfer from the Supreme Command to one of these HQs. Before I do that, I started to mention this, though I got sidetracked. Let's move this HQ, because once we transfer units into an HQ, you can no longer move it, because the action points of the unit you move in will be 0. I'm going to move this one north a little bit, which is just going to get it a little bit closer to this unit. You can see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 5. It was 5 away from this unit, or it is 5 away from this unit now, which means 60%. But it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 away when it was in Odessa. I think it's a pretty good idea generally to keep your HQs in cities, because if you have flak with them, they serve to do 2 things at the same time. 1, protect themselves with the flak, but 2, since they're in the city, they also protect the city with their flak. And cities are a very standard target for dive bombing or for level bombing, just because the enemy is going to try to reduce your production capabilities. However, just to demonstrate this HQ proximity, and because we know that nobody has any aircraft currently, I've moved this one north to kind of min-max a little bit better for the HQ proximity. Okay, that being said, I'm not going to change these. Let's do some transfers. Now that we've moved this unit, I'm not worried about moving more units in. In fact, we did a double bonus for ourselves because this one got closer, but it also got closer to my Supreme Command, so that when I transfer units in, here it would have cost 130 per infantry unit, but now we're 2 spaces closer, so it's only going to cost 110 per infantry. So what I'm going to do is I want to put a lot of riflemen forward. We don't have that many trains yet. And that is what I want to change. So we'll go back and we'll modify the production a bit. But just for now, I'm going to push forward. Let's say 1 artillery. Let's go with 2 artillery in the north, which I think is a pretty good offensive unit more than defensive. But we have no horses too. We probably should get some horses because we have nothing to pull these artillery with. So okay, let's just keep things very simple. I'm just going to transfer 40 riflemen, which will cost half of my real capacity on this turn. And now we can see that this is going to go gray. And if you're watching, now it's gray. Because it no longer has the action points to move, since the rifles I transferred in have no rifles, or have no action points remaining. When you do a transfer units beyond their movement area, they get... So if I wanted to transfer units from here to here, infantry can normally make that jump anyways. So I might as well just do this. Let's create a new blank division here. Let's make it part of our red HQ, because we already learned that that's the best way of doing things. Let's transfer units, let's say some rifles. And I'm going to say, can I do this? Yeah, under own power. So you can see that I've done, I could use any of these things, but I'm going to choose Navy, which is absurd. But it is already acknowledging that these units can make it under their own power. So I'm going to do this transfer like this. We can see this new division now has 40 riflemen. There they are. And they did lose the 25 readiness for just being transferred at all. Now we're actually going to choose to headquarter them from the 1st Army. Yes, they lose their HQs, and they go down to only 38. If we had done this directly, let's demonstrate one more time. If we had done this directly with the blue, now we transfer another 40 riflemen in. They will go under their own power. Then we can see the readiness would have dropped to 25, which is something I'm learning during this tutorial. I am verifying things during this tutorial at least. But these guys both moved under their own power, which means we've retained 4,000 of our rail capacity to move things all the way over to 2nd Army. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm sorry, I'm pressing T to transfer because it's an instinct, but let's transfer down to here. And what do we want to transfer? Well, I talked about artillery being very useful in offensives. Infantry guns are also really useful in offensives. Unfortunately, we have nothing to carry these units, which by that I mean horses. So I'm just going to transfer as many riflemen as we can. We will not be able to get a full 40. So it looks like we'll be able to get 36, which is fine. This will at least give us some kind of backup for the units down here. And these divisions are all the standard template that we started with because nobody's taken losses yet. But that'll probably change on the next turn when we actually can attack. Very good. So we've done unit transfers. We've exhausted all of our rail capacity here. We'll probably go back and do a little bit more of this just as a recap on the next tutorial video playing as the Russians. So let's call this let's call this turn to a close first, and then we'll also call this episode to a close. To recap, we talked a lot about HQs and swapping HQs and the drop of readiness that you incur from that. But the idea was just to make sure that we know how to transfer units to the front. So what I've done is I transfer units here. Now, what you would be able to do if these guys had any action points would be to transfer under their own power the riflemen. But you can see the cost is too expensive because we don't have any land capacity or rail capacity to move them, and they don't have the action points to move on their own power. But that would otherwise be how we could transfer them. Now I should go into the TOE, the Table of Organization and Equipment, because if you set up things that way, this all happens automatically, which is really nice. But it's nice to know how to do it manually, and we'll cover the TOE in a later video. So let's go ahead and end this turn. Let's get trains first. So we notice that we're running pretty low on trains. I'm going to stop artillery production just because this is so important to get trains. So we'll get 8 more trains for next turn. That'll leave us with 12 total, and that'll probably be enough for the purposes of this tutorial video. Okay, so let's end the turn. We're going to have the same kind of production, exactly the same kind of production as the Germans have had, I guess, sorry. And we will be changing that, but let's call this video to a close here, and we'll pick it up on the Russian turn. We'll kind of mimic the production, but we'll probably add some airplanes so we can get to air combat. On top of that, we can do more transfers, but we can do it a little bit faster now that we more or less know how to do it. But that'll serve as a review. Anyways, thanks for watching. I hope you found this helpful, and stay tuned for more in the next video.